Welcome back everyone once again to the last tier list for the year 4 pass. This is going to be the heavy class, and before we start the heavy class, I want to briefly talk about a few things. So recently I've been receiving some comments that there are just too many trucks in the higher tiers of these tier lists that I've been putting out. And I would actually agree. I think that it is a problem. I don't believe it's a problem with ranking them. I've tried to stay pretty consistent on how I personally rank these over the years. So what's going on then? I believe it's more of a testament that most new trucks entering the game since the year 3 pass started are just that, higher tiers. And I expect this to continue into the year 5 pass because let's be honest here, good trucks sell DLCs and Saber knows that we will buy them because there is an awesome truck in that DLC pack or standalone DLC pack. This list here that we're going to get started on has become the one I dread the most here at year 4. At one time, it was really fun to brainstorm, run through my notes, old reviews, and old streams to prepare for this presentation. Assembling this list to present it, I sat quietly staring at my computer screen, debating on how I could demote or even down tier trucks with logical reason. By going over old reviews and notes while also keeping in mind how strong new trucks have become. There have been some changes to this tier list, yes, but what has been elite for the last 3 years of this tier list series is not going to get thrown down, invalidated, or demoted by another S tier truck that comes along that slightly edges it out. Frankly, balance has been out the window for a while, which makes this list very tough. The continuation of the next best thing DLCs will probably continue throughout the year 5 and make this list even more dissatisfying in my humblest of perspectives. However, let's try to have some fun today with ranking these. Speaking of ranking, I'm going to quickly tell you how I rank the heavy class. So I kind of talked about this on my last tier list on the year 3 pass truck, so I'm going to just briefly tell you how I rank these. Ranking the heavy class has been the hardest because of 2 reasons. First, there's the belief that these trucks should be either in the heavy duty or off-road class, while some of them, I would say, based upon their weights and attributes, seem more along the lines of said classes. Second, is a reason that a lot of these trucks just don't have a lot of add-ons and they're very focused for specific roles, so ranking them against each other is a difficult task. However, I feel in general the larger heavy trucks had a correct identity from SnowRunner's publish date to roughly around when we started getting massive heavy trucks that essentially could equip most add-ons in the game. It's my belief that the very large, heavy trucks should be used for special mission trailers, rescues, and doing things when you've exhausted all your other classes' performance capabilities. So for the new additions during the year 4 pass and moving forward, having those insane amounts of add-ons doesn't give them a whole lot of merit in my humble opinion. Overall, I will rank the largest trucks based on how they've impacted my gameplay with respect to power, stability, maneuverability, and also trustworthiness when setting them against a certain task. Okay, so let's have some fun and rank some trucks. Before we do, guys, I'm going to quickly just say, right before I stack these trucks here in the D category, that this is not a review. I have reviewed all these trucks in detail. All you have to do is go to my channel, go to SnowRunner Truck Reviews, and find the truck that you are looking for. I've reviewed it in detail. It's all there for you. Also, the new Truck Request series for the base game vehicles is a new series we've started, which has a lot of base game vehicle trucks that you're seeing right here on the list that we've already covered. And trust me, more are going to be covered as well. And it's all based upon voting, so it's a really fun series. Other than that, you can go check out my prior tier list. And if you have any other information, please go to my Discord, send me a message, come to the streams, and I would be happy to answer any questions or just talk with you about vehicles. So I'm a nerd like that. Anyways, let's get started here. I'm going to try and be brief on a lot of these vehicles, lest I just say what I said in prior tier list. I'm going to be very brief, and we will jump into the garage and talk about other vehicles when we get to kind of like the top of the tiers, just to make a point on some things. But first off, let's talk about the tractors, the Futon, K7M, and K700. I'm going to just quickly say these don't affect a lot of my gameplay. They essentially are used for farming, and in my gameplay, not very much after that fact. Yes, you can have double tires on them. Their diff locks have been unlocked or engageable to allow them to turn sharper. And this is great for actually farming because during Season 8, the K700 and the K7M had a stupid turning radius that was so hard just to turn those farming trailers around when you got to the end of the field. So it made things rather annoying, especially in Season 8. Now the futon is definitely a little bit more maneuverable, I think, but since they've unlocked or made their diff locks engageable, some people think that's a nerf, but I think for maneuverability wise, it's been a buff. However, just in my gameplay, I don't use these outside of farming at all. You probably can use these for like a support vehicle if you want, but personally, I just don't use them, so I think they're going to stay down here. Okay, so let's talk about a vehicle that just got a buff with some add-ons, and that is the 770G. So as you can see, the 770G has a buff with add-ons. It now gets the high saddle, the maintenance frame add-on, and also this heavy fuel carrier. This has been here. However, you cannot attach a hitch trailer with any of these other than the heavy saddle or the high saddle. Now, this has been really cool because now you can actually do other things than just the heavy fuel carrier and also the heavy saddle, which is just for the rock trailer. So the 770G has definitely become more useful. However, it still lacks the maneuverability, and also its front overhang is absolutely crazy. You will bang your chin on this. It does upset the vehicle a little bit whenever it smashes itself into some things when you're driving. So overall, I thought it was definitely a lot better than it used to be. It has a pretty high sitting saddle, but it's still not going to be among the B tier or higher. So I felt that a C was a pretty good place to put it. It definitely got a buff. It's definitely much more usable, but it's not as good to put it into a class like the B tier, because yes, it does have big tires at 74 inches, always on diff lock, special coated tires and stuff like that, but its maneuverability and front overhang really do hurt it a lot, especially when you're moving special mission trailers. So I'll just leave it there. Okay, so moving on to the Azov Antarctic here at the C class. Okay, so we just covered the Azov 4220 Antarctic on the recent truck request. So if you want to see some driving and also a garage tour that's a little bit more in depth, go check that out, or go check out the review as well. But I think overall, the Azov 4220 Antarctic is one of the more heavier trucks in the game, has a decent fuel capacity, pretty nice engine at 260,000 torque. Its add-ons are, I think, okay-ish. It doesn't have that heavy saddle or the high saddle, I would say, to allow it to haul special mission trailers. Everything you're going to put on its frame is going to essentially make it even more tippy than it is. The truck itself doesn't actually have very high CGs. It's just a very tall sitting vehicle, and it's rather narrow. Also, the articulation is where a lot of its instability comes from as well, just from going over terrain, and then you make a turn, and then you're just boom on your side. Adding cargo just exacerbates that. Huge tires here, always on all-wheel drive. I wish this was switchable. So if you're going to have a switchable diff lock, I would rather have a switchable all-wheel drive. If you're going to have an always-on diff lock, a switchable all-wheel drive is always good. Just be able to force direct power in some ways, but I'm going to leave this where it's at. I think it's good in deep conditions, but for the scope that I would like to use trucks of this nature, it just doesn't hit the mark. Okay, so the last vehicle I'm going to throw up in here, we actually talked about this vehicle on the recent truck request series as well, is going to be the Derry Longhorn 3194. So the Derry Longhorn 3194 is rather heavy. Its max engine is at 210,000 torque, so it gives it a power to weight of A here, but I actually would say it's more or less along the lines of like C or C+, because as soon as you add weight to this vehicle, if you choose to use heavy tires, which we did talk about this in the truck request / revisit series, a good truck to downgrade tires to actually allow a little bit more slip and gain a little bit more pulling potential, this truck is a candidate for it right here. I usually downgrade to one of these Jet ATHDs that are doubles. They're still heavy tires, and it allows the truck to slip a little bit to be able to pull some heavy loads when you need to. The normal OHDs just have a grip coefficient that's too much, and the engine just can't turn tires under load. So overall, this vehicle has high saddle, low saddle, and that is basically it. Its maneuverability is very bad. Its turning radius is very bad. Its collision mesh is not terrible, but you do have things that will catch. Front overhang is going to hit as well. You have the dead axle. I think if it had more saddle height, better turning radius, and things like that, it would probably go up into B. But because it has power struggles, low maneuverability, and its saddle heights are, I wouldn't say the greatest, I think it's going to stay around the C+. Next up, I want to talk about two trucks that I think go right up into the B, and that is the Western Star 47X NF1430 and also its sibling, the 1424. We'll talk about these, and then I'll talk about separately the 49X after this. Okay, so the Western Star NF1430 is 11.7 US tons. Engine is 220,000. It is a very, very strong engine. High power to weight here. You can see S+ power to weight, even with the American small crane. And I use it as such, how you see it set up here. It's a wonderful truck. Very stable, in my opinion. The only problem is it has dead axles and its tires are 44 inches, yet they are OHD ones. You can actually use the OHD heavies with this, and it does really well. It almost feels somewhat like a pocket Navistar in some ways. I love this truck. It does a lot of good things for me. I don't really mind the double dead axle here. It doesn't really bother me too much. The ground clearance, however, is something to note. It's not really that great. And also it has no diff lock. I have to mention that. Fuel capacity is okay-ish. 77 gallons is actually not that bad. And most add-ons that it has, it can do them very well. So I think players will be pretty satisfied with this truck. It's actually my favorite of all the Western Star 47Xs and also the 57X, that whole Wolfpack DLC that came out. This is my favorite of them all. But let's talk about the NF1424 now. Okay, so the 1424 is a little different than the 1430. I think the stability is not as good as the 1430, but this one has better clearances, bigger tires. It doesn't get heavy tires though. They are medium weight tires. 220,000 torque. It is 9.2 US tons. It's the lightest truck in the heavy class. So its power to weight is absolutely phenomenal. It gets a roof rack here, as you can see. It's the only Western Star Wolfpack truck to have a roof rack. Also, it was recently buffed with the ability to have a low saddle with a crane, and the position of that is very favorable. This truck is absolutely great for hauling low saddle. It has a lot of power. You can force redirect to your aft axles if you need. You probably will never need to, just because it has so much power to weight. This truck hardly ever stalls. Very nice truck to drive. It does have a little bit of cab sway when you turn, so I don't think I could trust this truck overall more than the 1430 with balance or stability is concerned. But if I were to switch this truck to the heavy duty class, it would probably rank among the A, I guess. So that's where we're going to leave it. Coming right behind them, the Western Star 49X. I'm going to talk about this in brief detail, and there's some things I just noticed about this truck that's really, really cool. So let's check it out. Okay, so the 49X clocks in at 10.8 US tons, 220,000 torque, no race suspension, medium set tires, 47 inches, standard with North American trucks, wedge cap for a snorkel, and a plethora of add-ons that players can use with this vehicle. It does have that double dead axle that is an eyesore for people. Yet I do want to mention its collision mesh this is something I missed over the years, because when this truck first came out, I did not know about collision meshes. Well, I was just briefly running through the collision mesh for this truck the other day, and it is insane. It's like Kenworth T880 levels, which is quite admirable, to be honest. Yes, you probably will still have a lot of resistance from dragging these double tires from the dead axle through surfaces, but you're not accumulating much resistance from your frame. So I just want to say that. Stability-wise, I would say it's around average. If you are a person who has trouble keeping trucks on their wheels, you will probably say it's more along the lines of tippy. I think it's about average. It does have a little bit of cab sway. I believe the center gravities are more or less toward the front of the vehicle. I think there's one like down here, and then there's one like over here in the cab. So you're literally, I think, a little bit forward on your CGs toward the cab. So a good counterbalance for this is to essentially load up its rear axles. This truck will pull pretty much any load that you want to pull on it. Phenomenal amounts of power to weight, and it will do it for you. I actually really like this truck aesthetically, and I like using it a lot, and I probably should use it more in the future, but that is the 49X. Okay, next let's talk about the Navistar. Okay, so the Navistar comes in at 17.9 US tons, 210,000 for its top engine, and the engine itself is actually pretty tanky. All gearboxes that you would have on normal trucks. Raised suspension gets you 49-inch tires. It does have OHD, so yeah, 1 inch below 50 inches, still a pretty big tire. Pretty decent ground clearance as well, other than the tanks hanging down. Overall, the aesthetics of this truck are just quite incredible. Some really good things about it is it hauls from a low saddle position really well. This truck, I love to use low saddle. However, I wish that I could do crane, low saddle, and I just can't. So that is something that even if you remove this, you still can't do it. So you're stuck just either using a saddle low, saddle high, or a crane and pulling hitch trailer. I would probably not pull the hitch trailer. Using long logs is actually a good way to actually put some weight on its aft axles. It does have always on all-wheel drive, no diff lock. I wish this was a switchable all-wheel drive. If you're not going to have a diff lock, at least allow me to turn off the all-wheel drive penalty, because this engine burns so much fuel. Not to mention, when you're driving this truck, it is hard to see the actual vehicle in third person because so much smoke comes out of these stacks. It's kind of crazy. This thing is, I think people nickname it Smoky because it just smokes like crazy. The vehicle itself has a good amount of winch tie-down points that you can actually attach even from its top of its cab. You can actually use these to hold yourself down in tippy situations, to tie yourself off. The stability on it is rather good. The vehicle just burns so much fuel. You can hardly see when you drive it. And also its maneuverability is not that great. Steering, turning radius is also not that great, especially when you're using a low saddle. So that's some things that really kind of held it back there. I think if it had a little bit better turning radius, also crane with a low saddle, this would probably go up into the, I think, lower A tier, just because it would be that much of a monster. But I really do love the Navistar 5000 MV. The looks of it are great. It was a standalone DLC when the game first came out, so I did see a lot of people using this truck to get them through the game, and I definitely did. Even with no diff lock, the OHDs do make some magic work with this, so I think it's still a pretty strong B. Okay, next let's talk about the P16, and let's jump into the garage. Briefly talking about the P16, weighs 30 US tons, 210,000 torque, gives it a 7.7 power to weight, which is very low for a heavy truck. Advanced special gearbox, which has no all-wheel drive penalty, but it doesn't have all-wheel drive, has always-on diff lock. And with that always-on diff lock, they have a specially coated tire that has increased grip coefficients. This is the tire you want to use. Unless you are having extreme issues with pulling weight, then you could downgrade, but I think the whole gimmick of the P16 is, or I would say the strength of the P16 is essentially its grip coefficients. Hauling things up extreme loads, up grades, this truck is going to struggle. It's just a sheer fact of the matter. It just doesn't have it. I could talk about what I would do to change this vehicle, but that is for a separate video. It does have the P16 pole trailer front, which is like a custom thing they added to it just recently, I think in season 15. And also it gets a custom trailer that has matching tires and matching colors for long logs. Also has saddle high, and I want to note its saddle high position is still relatively high compared to newer vehicles as well. The problem with the P16 is essentially it has pulling troubles, and that is the story for both Pacific trucks. I would say its maneuverability is also not that great. Steering is not that great as well. Stability is good. If you do manage to flip it over, good luck flipping it back on its side unless you have a really strong truck to pull it over. Now, you'll notice that I did put this vehicle above the Cat 770G. Now, the Cat 770G has 74-inch tires. They are coated at 1,200 kilos in the rear, 600 in the front, while this doesn't have those type of weights coated. But I think it is a more pleasurable drive to use the P16 to pull any type of high saddle trailer rather than the 770G. So that is why I put this in the B class. I think even though it doesn't have all-wheel drive, doesn't have a lot of power to weight, it still can do the job. You just have to know where to use it. So with that being said, I think it's going to stay in B. Coming right behind that, I'm going to talk about the Pacific P512. So the Pacific P512 PF here, you can see it definitely is a Pacific truck. Looks very good, very aesthetically pleasing looking vehicle. 14.1 US tons, 210,000 torque, gets its power to weight decently high, standard gearboxes, no advanced special. Stock suspension, 51-inch OHD tires. These are pretty much the same coatings that the P16 has, yet this truck is left out of the always-on diff lock trend that the Pacific trucks have. This is a change I would probably make right off the rip, is just give this vehicle a always-on diff lock. However, it just doesn't have it. Moving on to add-ons here, It has a plethora of them. Stability-wise, I think the truck is around average. I think it does have instances where I feel its stability is above average, and instances where I feel that the cab sway is basically having it lean over and go up on 2 tires a little bit more than I would like. Yet I feel its stability is okay-ish. I'm not going to say it's great. I'm not going to say it's bad. I think it's pretty much around middle of the road based on your perspective. For me personally, it is about middle of the road. Tons of add-ons here, as you can see. You can use it to load up those rear axles that have special codes on them, and your performance is going to be the greatest in low with diff lock engaged because you have all that power force directing to specially coated 51-inch off-road tires, which is essentially the strength of the truck. This is where I think this truck kind of falls short is I would have rather had this truck be an all-wheel drive truck with a normal OHD1. It would have benefits in performance in a lot of areas that rear-wheel drive trucks just struggle. Another thing I do want to mention is when you load up aft axles with an RWD truck and try to make a turn, you're not having that front axle claw away and pull you through the turn. So it kind of just pushes you forward and extends your turn even wider. That is something I do want to note here. Lastly, before we move on, the fuel capacity is almost crippling. Yes, it doesn't have an all-wheel drive penalty, but with load, it can creep up into like those medium ranges where it just doesn't have a lot of uptime with 53 gallons, 200 liters of fuel. And that's pretty much all I have to say about this truck. Versatile, it's there. It can do a lot of different jobs. I just think, just like the P16, you just have to know either how to utilize it well in instances where it can get difficult, especially when you don't have a front axle clawing away. So I think more players that have a lot more skill or just experience with RWD, they'll probably be able to utilize this truck in some areas that newer players probably would struggle with. All right, so speaking of the Pacific trucks, let's end this up with the P12, the revered P12. I love this truck. Let's talk about this in the garage. Okay, so the P12, this is where a lot of people are going to call me on my bias, and that's okay because I am. Coming in at 29 US tons, 210,000 torque, advanced special gearbox, switchable all-wheel drive, always-on diff lock, stock suspension, and a plethora of heavy tires to use, including a good amount of add-ons for a base game vehicle. This truck right here, definitely for a base game truck with, if its size has a decent amount. It's one of the better crane trucks in the game because your outriggers here or these landing gears are actually really high because it actually adds this other little platform, boosting this even higher in the air. I will say that this vehicle is interesting to use, and it also can be very hard to use. It has similar issues with power to weight, similar to that of the P16. You can probably see that I have a JAT ATHD3 equipped on here. You actually could downgrade these if you don't have the JAT pack. You'd be able to downgrade to the Pacific P12 tire. That would be another move, or the ATHS1, which is just a single. I have a double here because the JAT pack. This is what I choose to use. Now, if I were to use the off-road heavy double ones or just the OHD, any OHD here, the truck itself has too much grip coefficient that its engine cannot turn tires under load. This is why when I downgrade to an ATHD or even an all-terrain tire, the grip coefficients are lowered, therefore the engine can overcome the grip coefficient that's laid down on the earth, turn tires, and still maintain forward movement. This is a truck that I would get a lot of comments of people complaining about over the years, and it's not that I really like this vehicle back then. I've grown to love it, but I used it more or less because I wanted to prove to people that it wasn't a useless vehicle. If you watch my hard modes or any type of gameplay that I have here with newer seasons, playthroughs, most of the time when I'm hauling a special mission trailer, I'm using the P12 just as, I don't want to say a flex, it's as I just want to show people that it can be done. And I think if you downgrade its tires, like I spoke about on my truck request video, if you want to see some little bit more information on that, go check that out. This truck can really do it. So I would say if you do not like this vehicle, try downgrading its tires and just give it another shot. I think it's really stable, pretty efficient for what it is, and it can do the job. You just have to have a little bit of patience. So with that being said, I think I would take the Pacific P12 over the P16 any day. And that's why I'm going to put it here at the top of B. Okay, so let's talk about the newest, I guess you would say, non-super heavy, because it's really not a super heavy, the Chimera ST813. So I'm going to slide this guy kind of right up in here. I think it's a B, and we'll talk about why. The Sleiter ST813 Chimera comes in at 31.6 US tons, 210,000 torque on its engine, 7.3 power to weight. So it's lower power to weight than the P16. Advanced special gearbox, always on diff lock, 69-inch off-road tires that are basically its customs. No raised suspension, and you can downgrade these tires to a 67. I know I'm saying downgrade even though it's going up from an off-road tire to a mud tire, but hear me out. Because these tires have a 3.0 friction modifier for dirt, they are gripping dirt when you're driving over any type of terrain, right? So that friction coefficient at 3.0. Mud tires have a lower dirt friction. So therefore, if you are locking up tires, most likely you're doing it going up a hill. So if you don't want to lock up tires, downgrade to like a JAT MSH. And I think you'll be able to turn tires. Also, when you decrease tire size, you increase pulling power. I don't know the scale of how much per se, but there is definitely a study that's been done where if you decrease tire size, you actually increase pulling power. So that is a thing. These tires, however, all of these tires are coated at 600 kilos. So you're getting the maximum benefit of pulling potential with this vehicle. It's going to struggle with very heavy loads. I have pulled a lot of high saddle with it on season 16 and it's done fine. But for most players, they're going to feel dissatisfied. Now, my counter to fix this is, just like I said about the Kenworth back in the day, pull all these add-ons off this truck and make it capable of doing or pulling weight and not having a ton of add-ons. Because essentially what they're doing is to balance this vehicle out because it has so many add-ons. This is like Azov 73210 levels of add-ons here. If you like look at this list, basically what they're doing is they're balancing this truck because they gave it so many add-ons that they have to find a place to pull back on the reins a little bit. And I think they did that with its engine power. So my counter for that is take add-ons away, give it the same engine as its brother, which we'll talk about later, which is I think is 245,000 torque. And I think you have, I would say an upper A-class vehicle, maybe even higher. Another thing I will knock about this vehicle is I don't feel that it is as stable as its CGs suggest. There is weight in its cab, but its suspension doesn't flex that great. The rears are okay, front is okay-ish for a very large vehicle like this, but there's no frame twist or flexion, I would say. So whenever you go over an obstacle and your cab kind of dips over, it almost feels like you're a lollipop and you just want to go. So that's something you do need to understand about. So overall, I think its stability is about average. I would say maybe above average if I'm going to put my 2 cents in there. For some players, they're going to just call it tippy, but I think it's around above average. I think it'll hold on for most cases, but that is my perspective. That is why essentially it is going to sit in the B class because it just doesn't have, even though it can march through super conditions, it just doesn't have the raw strength and pulling power to be in the upper tiers for a heavy truck that's going to be a super heavy truck per se. Okay, so to finish out the B tier, I'm going to throw up in the Derry Special. And I'm going to talk about logical reasons why I demoted this to a B+. So the Derry Special comes in at 29.6 US tons, 280,000 torque here, 10.4 power to weight. So it has a very high power to weight among the super heavy trucks, right? Advanced special gearbox, always on all-wheel drive. I wish this was switchable. Good fuel capacity, roof rack, switchable diff lock, gets multi-purpose gearbox as well, active suspension so you can raise it at will, and it gets 55-inch tires that are heavy tires with a bunch of add-ons that you can use. Yet the problem lies with the Derry Special, and I'm going to quickly say why I demoted this because I talk about this on stream a lot. One, its stability is not that good. I think when you add weight to its frame, increase its active suspension or activate it to increase its vertical CG and also its clearance, you just make its stability that much worse. Now, yes, you can use this with a saddle and kind of negate that. Yes, that is a thing. Also, I must add that in the PTS, this truck actually had mappings for this front here that basically anywhere you saw something visually, there was mapping for its hitbox. They have recently kind of relaxed or given this a favorable collision mesh, and also some things that would collide up here as well. They have helped the Derry Special out. Yet the kicker here is that having 10.4 power to weight and getting outpulled by something that has 7.7 power to weight, which is the Plad 450, is not a good thing. You have the number 2 engine in the game and you're being outpulled by a vehicle that has much less power to weight. And the reason for that is the same reason that the Mastodon couldn't pull very heavy weight when it first came out. When the Mastodon was first released, all of its tire sets were 200 kilos. As you can see, all these tire sets here, or all these tires were set for 200 kilos on the Mastodon. These are all 200 kilogram tires as well. When they updated the Mastodon, they gave it a better turning radius or sharper turning, and then they also increased its tire weights. And then I retested it on places that I tested it on its review, and it absolutely crushed things in even higher gears. This is the case with the Derry Special. It is getting outpulled by vehicles that it probably shouldn't get outpulled by. Yes, it has a good high gear. The Advanced Special gearbox with throwing it in high gets, ramps up for 25% more torque, and you're not going to turn all tires at once because you don't have a diff lock. So some tires that don't have grip are going to spin really fast. Some tires that do have grip are going to spin really slow. It's just not having the even spinning. So you're just not going to have really great pace. So based upon its stability and also its lack of pulling power, which it should be elite, it should be up there with the Avenhorn. The Avenhorn, I think, has 10.8 power to weight. This has 10.4. This should be right below the Avenhorn's pulling potential. It should really just almost rival, or actually should be better than the 605R, but it just doesn't even come close. So for that, I downgraded this to B+. Now, if Sabre would give this 600 kilos and also decrease its CGs, this would go right back up into S. But as it stands, it's just not an S tier vehicle, and that's where I think this is going to stand. Okay, so let's move on to the A class. I'm going to throw up a truck here that is very controversial, and that is the Twin Steer. All right, so the Western Star 6900 Twin Steer comes in at 24.4 US tons, 250,000 torque. You see the high range gearboxes on here. It doesn't have a special gearbox to dampen its fuel burn, so the fuel consumption will be rather high under load. Gets a raised suspension, 63-inch tires, and a ton of tire options, ranging to Jats to MHS tires and such. So as you can see, you can get some single wide track tires down here if you would like to have those to use. Switchable all-wheel drive, switchable diff lock. It has no add-ons. It basically is a 4-slot mover. I just touched on this vehicle on a truck request video, and I want to say that this vehicle, essentially, you could either, based upon your skill level, I think you could either say this truck is down to a C tier, or you can, if you're that good, if you're someone like Timmy Gunn, who breaks records with this truck, you probably will say this is like an S tier vehicle. For me, I'm not that great with it, but I know its potential. It is probably the most difficult yet rewarding vehicle to drive. Punishing yet rewarding. And for that, I think it's definitely an A tier just because it will just smash through things. And I love that it's just a specialist and it just does the job very well in the right hands. And that's the reason why it's going to stay an A tier truck. Okay, so moving on to a truck that doesn't have many add-ons, but I think it's still an A tier vehicle. So I'm gonna throw the Tatra T813 up here. The Tatra T813 comes in at 17.4 US tons, 260,000 torque. This is a base game engine. This truck essentially has the most or the highest power to weight of any vehicle that shares this engine in it. So it has S plus power to weight, as you can see. So a very high power to weight truck for a heavy class truck. Advanced Special gearbox, no raised suspension. It does have the Tatra backbone, and you can see the positive camber here. This suspension is quite incredible, giving it really, really, really good stability. 50-inch tires, has customs, which they're basically on it right now. And if you have the Jet Pack, you can get other tires too. Add-ons, it doesn't really have many of them, which is, I think, an okay thing, to be honest. It does have the Tatra sideboard bed. I technically like to use it with saddle high just to move mission trailers around, or also just any type of high saddle movement, because the truck has switchable all-wheel drive, switchable diff lock. You can force power to rear axles. You really are not going to need to. But the only thing I really think that holds this truck back from being essentially elite is saddle placement, which is not very high. And also it has 200 kilos of tire weights. And it doesn't have an always-on diff lock. I wish this truck had an always-on diff lock, because it would be much more rapid when you toss it into high gear or just any gear, because essentially what happens is some power bleeds off, some tires turn that don't have any traction underneath them, and then tires that do have traction underneath them, they're not turning. So your performance is not going to be as good as if you were using something or an 8x8 with an always-on diff lock in high gear, because you're just not turning all tires at all speeds or all the same speed. And that is essentially my critique for the Tatra T813. I actually used this to pull the rocket trailer out of a Moor back when a Moor first came out, and I think it did it rather well. There were some times it did get hung up a good bit, and sometimes where I was like, it definitely struggled a little bit, but I think for having a lower sitting high saddle, it did rather well. I passed it off to the 605R, and the 605R just made short work of it, but I did feel this truck did a good job. Its suspension is absolutely phenomenal. I know I talked about that before. I just want to say it attributes to it having great stability. And I think because it has great stability, good pulling power, high power to weight, it's going to be an A-class truck. All right, so next we're going to talk about the Boar. I definitely think the Boar stands up here in the A-class, and let's talk about it. So the Boar comes in at 23.3 US tons, 260,000 torque here. It doesn't have a special or an advanced special gearbox to kind of dampen the all-wheel drive consumption that you incur when you have these gearboxes, a 30, a 40, I think a 60, and a 20 here. So you are going to have higher burn values with this, even though this engine actually has, I think, 11.5 consumption, which is definitely better than the M2450 at 250,000 torque. But still, it's going to burn a lot of fuel, and it only has an 80-gallon, 300-liter tank, which is basically the same as like a white Western Star. That is my critique here on the Boar, other than its stability being, I would say, around average, because the vehicle itself is just so tall. It's a massive vehicle. Gets a race suspension, 58-inch tires. This vehicle is one of the only vehicles in the game to have medium tires and also heavy tires as options, so you have to be careful about which ones you use. And I will talk about this. The OMDs and the UODs are essentially medium weight tires, and then all of a sudden you jump down here to an OHD. This is what you want to use. If you use a medium tire, you're not going to have the benefit of having heavy tires assist you in pulling potential. I've actually made a video on this. It's called The Power of Heavy Tires. Go check it out. It'll show you the difference. The Boar is actually on there with both tire sets. And when you switch to or from the UOD2 or any medium weight tire to a heavy tire, it's like night and day for pulling. The vehicle itself pulls weight very, very well from a high saddle standpoint. And that is essentially what I love to do with this vehicle, is either long logs or saddle high. Its saddle high height is actually really good. I think it's up there definitely within like the top 7, I believe. So it's very respectable. It goes pretty fast. Even with the off-road gearbox and a low-high setting, it marches pretty fast. Even in high gear, in off-road gearbox, it will move pretty quick. If you plan to use the high-range gearbox, just be advised you do have a very large front end and overhang that you will collide and smash your engine up. But that is pretty much all I have to say. The truck itself has just been impressive. Every time I take this thing out and use it for high saddle missions, it does the job so well. It will pull some pretty heavy fuel amounts out of its tank doing the job, but it will do it and not complain very much. And that is why it is going to be an A-class truck. Okay, so the next truck, some people might not agree with this, but I think the Derry 4520 is definitely an A-class truck, even though it doesn't have many add-ons. And let's go in here and talk about it. So the Derry 4520 is another Derry Longhorn truck that is aesthetically very good to look at. But that is not the reason why it is in the A-class. In Season 6, it got 230,000 torque. It weighs 29.5 US tons. It is very, very heavy. Prior to Season 6, it had 192,000 torque, which essentially crippled it. Anytime you would move heavy loads on hill grades, this truck would struggle. And the move was to jump out of all-wheel drive and switch in diff lock to fire the back 3 axles. And sometimes it worked, and sometimes it was just too much. Even with its new engine, I would actually say that it needs a weight decrease, that or a power increase. And I think this would probably either slide up to the top of A, but it wouldn't get to the S class. It doesn't have an advanced special gearbox, so it will draw some fuel from it, especially if you're using high range or off-road. It does have a very high fuel capacity here. As you can see, stock suspension does not get erased. 50-inch tires, I tend to use whatever off-road tire that looks good at the time. They pretty much all are going to do very well. The truck is very, very heavy, so it's going to have lots of grip value. And it only has 3 add-ons: log carrying, high saddle, and low saddle. I tend to use it as a low saddle specialist and also carrying logs, and it does it very well. The highlight of why I put the Derry 4520 here, it has lots of fuel, it has the ability to switch off all-wheel drive and force direct power to 3 axles in the back, which is a wonderful thing. Its turning radius is phenomenal for a heavy truck. The front and rear axle can turn, so therefore the stability of the truck is also exceptional. If you do actually upset the vehicle's balance, all you have to do is just turn to the side that you're tipping on, and the whole truck just almost rotates, and you save your tip almost instantly. So to recap, the Derry Longhorn 4520 is an A-tier truck because it can turn very well. Its maneuverability is phenomenal for being a heavy truck, and its stability is exceptional. It has enough power to do jobs. It probably could use a weight reduction or a power increase to essentially bring it up to some other levels, but for what it is very respectful, and that is why it's going to stay in A. Okay, so the next truck I'm going to throw up in here is going to be the Tatra Force into A. Alright, so to be very brief about the Tatra Force here, 17.5 US tons, 260,000 torque, advanced special gearbox, switchable options, 50-inch tires, and a decent amount of add-ons here to go along with that. Now, the main thing I want to mention with the Tatra Force is it was notably unstable before. I think it seemed like it was very front heavy. Well, since about season 13, they did a longitudinal weight shift from its front end back a little bit. And you can actually see this because the camber of the tires are actually positive before, and this is actually a really heavy add-on to be honest. So let me actually just change this real quick to show this a little bit better. So as you can see, the camber is back, similar to that of the Tatra T813, where the camber is there. Before, there was so much weight in the front end that the cab kind of dipped down, and this camber was actually neutral because of so much weight being on it. Tatra backbone suspension gives this thing much better stability than a lot of other trucks just because of the travel, the single swing arm axles that actually can operate independently. So with that buff and also just how good this truck can pull weight and do its job, I think it's going to stay in A. Other than that, it's pretty efficient, just like the Tatra T813, and it just does the job well. I think the movement of the longitudinal shift has definitely helped its stability, and therefore I think it's a solid A-class truck. All right, so let's move on here to the Dan 96320. So the Dan 96320 comes in at 18.3 US tons, 260,000 torque, advanced special gearbox, always on all-wheel drive and diff lock, 51-inch tires, and as of season 6, it gets the active suspension, giving it much better ground clearance because it has a huge front end. And since having this active suspension, collisions have become much less, in my opinion. So that is a huge thing to get this thing out of the mud. One thing I do want to add here is this is a base game vehicle and it does have an independent suspension. The Dan has been kind of overshadowed when the game first came out because we had Tegas, Vorons, and all the KOLOBs and stuff that kind of just cast a shadow over the Dan. But I think people are coming around to the fact that the Dan is just really, really strong. I did a revisit on this, I think, and it can just do most things very well. The only problem with the Dan is that it doesn't have doubles, and when you put significant amount of weight down on it, you can see how its suspension, which is independent, compresses quite a bit. However, I love to actually load this thing up with low saddle and put weight on it because its front end it's rather front heavy. So you want to load up its rear axles to be able to utilize balancing it out a little bit. And it also, if you put more weight on its aft axles, you collide with your front end a little bit less. That is pretty much all I'm going to say about the Dan. It is exceptional in pulling power. It has great stability, and most of its add-ons that it has, which even the multi-purpose, it can handle it very well because the multi-purpose add-on is very top heavy, and the Dan seems to just handle it fine. So for that, I think it's definitely going to be an A-tier vehicle. Okay, so I'm going to be very brief on this next one, and it's going to be essentially the Western Star 6900 XD. And you're probably wondering, why in the world did I throw it at the top of A? I will explain this, but also please go check out my review on it because I think it might actually give you more information than I'm going to give you here. I'm going to quickly breeze over this, but my review on this truck is probably one of the better ones I've done. So please go check out the review on it, and I'll talk about this just in brevity. Okay, so the 6900 XD came out prior to season 16, 21.3 US tons. The max engine is 192,000 torque, and this is where the only thing wrong with this truck is essentially this. It just doesn't have the power to weight that most trucks have. Now, that is pretty much the only problem with this vehicle. The other thing I could say is maybe its fuel capacity probably needs to come up in along the lines of where its sibling is, the twin steer, but I'll just leave it at that. The reason why I have its customs on is because of lacking power to weight. Yes, you can use the OHDs and have good success with them, but like I said before, downgrading tires to an all-terrain is going to allow the tires to slip. Now, if you're still wondering why I put this in A, if you go watch my season 16 play, I overstacked with this truck with low saddle, as you can see here. I would stack 3 sets of metal beams, 3 sets of concrete slabs, or even more right behind the cab and between the crane. And then I'd have a full load of overstacked cargo on a low saddle. And this thing with these tires downgraded would just march through anything that I needed to march through. Now, I also need to add here, the reason why this truck is still in the top of A. If you look at my review, I had medium log bunk on this truck marching through super conditions. This is something that doesn't happen. So its collision mesh is absolutely phenomenal. If you look at its collision mesh, which is on my review, so please go watch that. I definitely think it'll kind of bring all this together because I'm not going to talk about it that much more. A truck that can march through super conditions, have exceptional stability, which it does, and be able to overstack that much cargo with a semi-trailer is definitely an A tier. I would say if this truck had more power to weight or a better engine, it would probably go to S. There are people that might say this needs the twin steers engine, and I'm going to disagree. Because if we know what truck is going to come next, which is the 5600 TS, we know that the 5600 TS is strangulated essentially by its fuel burn from the M2450 with an off-road or high-range gearbox. Yes, this truck has more fuel capacity and roof rack, but you're probably going to get 5 more minutes uptime if you gave this truck the Westline V16 M2450. So I think an alternate engine would be the better move. Now I'm going to leave it at that and we're going to move on. And just like we mentioned the 5600 TS, I'm going to throw this in the top of A. This is a strong A. I'm going to say this is an A+, and so is this truck right here. This truck has been moved down from S recently, and I'm going to talk about why. Okay, so the Paystar 5600 TS weighs 24 US tons. It gets the Westline V16 M2450, just like I mentioned here when I was talking about the 6900 XD. It doesn't have an advanced special gearbox to kind of pull back that consumption because it only has 74 gallons of fuel. And this is where this truck is really cut short on what it really should be. If this didn't have such a high fuel burn, this truck would be back into S. The reason why this is here, because I'm going to say straight up, it can do all these add-ons. Its stability is exceptional. Its power delivery is also exceptional. Can overstack as well, even with the low saddle. The vehicle itself, I can't say enough good things about its performance. Its suspension travel is probably one of the best I've ever seen in the game. When you watch this thing crawl over obstacles, it almost looks like a caterpillar the way these things just go up and down, and that helps with its stability even farther. So, exceptional stability, exceptional power delivery. The problem at hand is it's just cut short by having insane fuel consumption that you just can't do anything with it other than what you're seeing on this screen. This is essentially what this truck is. It is an S-tier fuel truck, as Zing would say, because I can't use this thing to do any other job but this. Now, I probably could, but I would have to double my efforts to get fuel into the field and double my fuel trucks just to run this and not run out of gas. So for that, because I really just can't utilize this truck and its strengths, I think it downgrades it to an A. So that's kind of where I'm going to leave it. If it didn't have such high fuel burn, it would be back up into S easily. Okay, so let's talk about the Aramatsu Forester. I'm gonna throw this right up in here, A+. I feel like this is on the cusp of being an S tier truck. I'll talk about what holds it back and what really gets it to this A+ here. Okay, so the Aramatsu Forester weighs in at 24.8 US tons, 192,000 torque, so its power to weight is not that good. Advanced special gearbox to slow down the fuel consumption for all-wheel drive because its all-wheel drive is actually always on. No race suspension, 52-inch tires. I tend to use the widest tire it has just to further give it even more balance here because essentially this truck is a specialist for just logging. So the reason this truck is on the cusp of essentially going into S tier, but I kept it as an A+ here is because, well, I don't think its ground clearance and also its off-road prowess is up in the elite status to put it up there with some of the best off-roaders, best trucks essentially in this class. It does have articulation. The truck itself is exceptionally stable. It is one of the safest bets when it comes to logging. Now, one of its superpowers that not many people really know about when talking about packed logs is whenever you pack a medium set of logs, they are 8 metric tons. However, in this vehicle, they're 5 metric tons. So you don't have a full 8 metric tons on the vehicle to pull this weight because it only has 192,000 torque. Now, even with burnt logs that are 5,000 packed, this actually is only applied 4,000 kilos to its frame. So therefore, you're not hauling as much weight as a normal packed set of logs for those medium log sets, which I think is an awesome thing. The vehicle itself, I'm just going to say it is the best logging apparatus that we have in the game currently. Overstacking logs with this thing, I essentially do it all the time because logging has become a very big part of the game. And I think the Forester has been up to the task of making it much safer to do logging tasks for players. So that's why it's up here in A+. Okay, so let's talk about a vehicle I missed on the last tier list because I did not wait for the standalone DLC, the mid-season DLC after Season 12. I actually made the Season 12 tier list right after the conclusion of North Carolina, and I did not wait for this vehicle, and that is the Azov Atom, and it's going to go up into S, and let's talk about it. The Azov Atom weighs 19.0 US tons. It gets the same engine as the Voron Grad, 235,000 torque, massive fuel capacity, roof rack supplies, custom add-ons, custom tires, switchable all-wheel drive, always-on diff lock like most Azovs get, no race suspension, and a plethora of add-ons for players to enjoy. You can even overload with a small flatbed here and crane, even the 3-slot, so you can do a lot of overstacking with this. This vehicle is really good. I must also mention it basically has a pocket raised suspension because its collision mesh is absolutely insane. If you look underneath it, go check out my review on this. Its collision mesh is fantastic. It has better performance than pretty much any other Azov 8x8 that has similar tire sizes, and it is considered one of the most efficient vehicles in the game. I actually would argue the Pedera and also potentially the Mack Pinnacle is. I would say those three, the Atom, the Pinnacle, and the Pedera, probably are up there among the most efficient vehicles in this game. I have to say though, when I first reviewed this truck, it was absolutely tippy. It was just not a stable truck. Well, since then, there was an update video with that came out actually, I think either a month later or something like that. They updated the Azov Atom and they made it much more stable. So because it's very stable, it outperforms any other Azov 6x6 with similar tire sizes in any type of terrain, and also being very, very efficient and getting jobs done with really good power to weight, basically weighing less than a 64131 and having much more torque than it. This truck is definitely going to be in the S tier vehicle. So however you plan to use the Azov Atom, it will get places. It will have crazy amounts of engine uptime. It just kind of does it all. So for that, it's going to go in the S class. Okay, so let's continue here with the Azov 73210. I'm going to throw this up into S. This has been in the S tier pretty much since the onset of this tier list series, and it's probably going to stay as such. And let's talk about it. Okay, so the Azov 73210 clocks in at 22.3 US tons. It has 260,000 torque on its engine. This engine burn is 11.5, I believe. 0% all-wheel drive penalty, always on all-wheel drive diff lock, 50-inch tires, massive fuel tank, and it gets an active suspension, I believe, as of Season 6. And this kind of mitigates the biggest issue with the Azov is its front overhang. As you can see, looking at it here, it looks almost bus-like, and it has this massive front overhang that will collide with things. The active suspension definitely lessens the amount of times you strike terrain, but it is still going to happen. And that essentially is the only ding I really have on this vehicle. I know I referenced the Chimera having Azov 73210 like add-ons. This is what I'm talking about. The add-on list is almost endless here. It almost has pretty much every add-on that's in the game. And it can do pretty much all of them with ease. It has plenty of power. Its maneuverability is good because its rear tires steer as well. So it turns pretty much on a dime. It can do most tasks that you set it against, and it doesn't really complain. And that is essentially why this truck is going to stay there, because it's stable, it's efficient, it's powerful, and it's versatile. And that's why it's going to be an S tier vehicle. Next, I want to talk about the FEMM 37AT. I borderline wanted to downgrade this to A for essentially one reason, but I'll talk about why I thought it just crept back up into the C category here. The FEMM 37AT weighs in at 32.9 US tons, 288,000 torque, highest torque engine in the game, tied with the T880. Also has a downgraded engine here, and then this is probably going to be the better option to downgrade if you like to save on fuel savings, because the R2 engine is very thirsty. And it does give you a massive amount of torque, like I just said. Advanced special gearbox to calm down that consumption, because it does have always on all-wheel drive, which I wish was switchable. Stock suspension, 71-inch tires, and its add-ons come with the truck with a float body, 4-slot bed, and also things like high saddle, 3-slot with a small crane if you would like to do that as well. And this can move a lot of cargo. So the reason why I almost downgraded this truck is because, well, its frame is so long that using it for special mission trailer hauls, you have to essentially manage 2 hinge points because the vehicle itself is articulated. So the connection point with the trailer in the back from a saddle standpoint is a very long distance from the cab. So therefore I'm managing 2 hinge points, which is the connection to the saddle and then also my steering angle. Then I have to add that its steering control is really not that great. It's not really that fun to manage those pulling a high saddle trailers, but still, as a sheer 8-slot packed cargo hauler and overall performance through thick terrain, the FEMM 37AT is up there with the best of them. Also having 9.6 power to weight, which is right below like something like a 605R. It pulls a lot of weight. It pulls through deep surfaces. The only thing I really can just say total that dings this truck is articulation kind of just messes with it. So that is pretty much why I do not like using it, but I still think the strengths of this truck merits it being on this list and considered. So that's why it's going to stick here. Okay, so let's pull out a year 4 pass vehicle, and that is going to be the Plad 450. The Plad 450 comes in at 35 US tons, which is the number 3 heaviest vehicle in the game. At 245,000 torque, gives it a very low power to weight, and that is essentially my biggest critique on the Plad 450 is it doesn't have a lot of power to weight. They essentially made this vehicle too heavy. I think they should actually do a weight reduction because 245,000 torque and being 35 tons US is really heavy. Power to weight is pretty darn low. Multi-purpose gearbox is actually really efficient. I like using it, has good speed to it, 0% all-wheel drive penalty. So you don't have any all-wheel drive penalty, so your consumption is rather low. Always on diff lock, switchable all-wheel drive that you can actually force direct to rear axles if you would ever need to. The collision mesh on this thing is absolutely incredible. So it'll essentially just walk through super conditions, even with a 63-inch tire and no raised kit. Lots of tire options. I tend to use off-road singles. However, because of its low power to weight, you might want to consider downgrading to an all-terrain tire to allow the vehicle to slip a little bit. I talked about this on other trucks on this list, but I actually have been using the ATHS on this, and it's performed pretty well. Being that it already is 35 US tons, it's generating a lot of force into the ground to generate grip. So decreasing that grip coefficient is going to allow the truck to turn tires under load. This is a good idea. You could do that if you feel the truck is starting to seize up going up hills. Frame add-ons, it has a plethora of them, and its stability is absolutely phenomenal. Also gets trunk repair supplies. Its fuel tank is not that large as well, but it does have fuel tank supplies here at 43 gallons on its roof rack, so you can keep you on the road for a decent amount of time. You can even use the crane with the float body and do some overstacking, pull hitch trailers. Saddle high placement is pretty good. The truck is just amazing. I'm going to say that. When it first came out, I did a review on it, and I also have a couple clips on the review of it just running through mud pits in high gear, holding on for stability with fuel tankers, almost tipping over to its side, but somehow it glues itself back to the surface. I can't say enough good things about it. And like I said, the only thing I think is just bad about the Plad essentially is it's just too heavy. And that's pretty much my only critique, but looks great. I love the way it performs. It's going to be an S tier truck. Next, I'm going to throw up the Cat 745C because this truck has actually got some changes and given add-ons, and we'll talk about those right now. Sadly, I just did a truck request video for the Cat 745C literally weeks prior to it getting all these different buffs, or I would say add-ons given to this truck. So I'm probably going to have to make an update video, but hopefully this will suffice here. We'll talk about it. It weighs 31.6 US tons, 250,000 torque, 12.5 on its consumption for this engine. Advanced special gearbox, which nullifies the all-wheel drive penalty because it has switchable all-wheel drive, switchable diff lock. I would love if this had straight up always on. I think if it did have always on features, the performance would be absolutely crazy outside of low gear. This truck is essentially a low gear monster. I absolutely love it. Articulated steering and its cab and frame twist independently when going over obstacles, giving it even better stability because it can actually conform to the terrain that it's actually hitting. Now let's talk about some add-ons that it just got. It got a flatbed, a 2-slotter that actually has repair points, so you can haul any 2-slot cargo on this flatbed. Really cool, right? It also has the normal fuel carrier, has the log carrier like it always had, and now gets a maintenance frame add-on, 300 repair points, 2 spare tires, 291 gallons in its fuel tank. I would probably still use the fuel carrier, to be honest, just for the fuel amount. Now, it does have a saddle high, and this is probably what I'm going to highlight the most is because I have been taking this out and using it to haul saddle trailers. And even though I don't like the FEMM hauling saddled trailers because of the overall articulation and having to deal with 2 hinge points, being that it's the hinge on the actual truck with articulation, and then the hinge point on the saddle when you're actually making a turn. This is a little bit different here with the Cat because it's not as long, so I don't feel like it's pushing the trailer out left and right whenever I'm steering, and like kind of whipping the trailer whenever I kind of roll out the vehicle. It kind of almost follows it. And I have noticed the 745C has done really well hauling saddle high trailers. It might not have the highest sitting saddle right now, but it's doing really well. Even if they did not give this truck any add-ons at all, this vehicle would still be an S tier vehicle. I do have to mention before I take off and talk about the next truck, it does actually get a snorkel now. So you can ford some rivers. I don't think you're definitely not going to be able to ford the deep ones that come up, to the glass here. But here is your snorkel, which we've been wanting for a while on this truck. So that is a quality of life improvement. I think overall, this truck has probably made the biggest come up of all the cat changes that has come out. So hopefully there's more changes in the future. I really like it, regardless of if it got add-ons or not. It was still going to be an S tier vehicle because it is one of the best vehicles to rescue trucks, and also it handles deep terrain with ease. So that's the Cat 745C for you. So now I'm going to throw two vehicles up here that are actually in queue for the next video of the truck request series. And that is the KOLOBs. So they're going to go right up in here. And I'm actually going to put the long nose in front of the short nose. And there's a good reason for that. Now I'm going to go through this in very brief detail, but I'm also going to cover these probably again on the truck request series because these are next. So I'll be very quick here. First off, the KOLOB 74760 weighs in at 37.3 US tons, 260,000 torque, always on all-wheel drive diff lock, 59-inch tires, much higher fuel capacity than its brother that we'll talk about here in a second. And it gets an active suspension, which is as of Season 2, giving it better clearances. I do have to mention that both of these vehicles do have independent suspensions, so their suspension travels are actually pretty good. And it has pretty much one add-on that is saddle high. And you're probably wondering, why is this an S tier vehicle? Well, it's an S tier vehicle because of a couple things. One, it is the heaviest vehicle in the game. It pulls saddle high trailers very well. It has one of the more high sitting saddles in the game. I believe it's probably roughly around like top 5, top 6, which is still very respectable, very stable. And also, I might add that its performance is very good because it has always on features, or always on all-wheel drive and diff lock. And then one of the highlights, I believe, is its maneuverability. These two vehicles, for how large they are, they're actually kind of dwarfed with some of the vehicles we're going to talk about here. But even so, their maneuverability is really good. They can turn very sharp. This is super important when you're hauling really, really big trailers, is having a truck that's able to make sharp turns and then also make wide turns and then cut sharp. These vehicles can do it. They have very good turning radiuses. A lot of bigger trucks just don't have that. So that's why they're going to go up there. And let's talk about its brother, the 74941. The 74941 is essentially the number 4 heaviest vehicle in the game at 34.8 US tons. So it has a little bit more power to weight, less fuel capacity. It has switchable all-wheel drive, switchable diff lock. So essentially it's stuck to being a diff lock monster with low plus, all-wheel drive on, diff lock on, and that's probably where you're going to have the most performance. The other one is going to have better performance outside of low gear because it actually has everything locked in. This one, not so much. Still, it has active suspension, getting its saddle up a little bit higher, which is nice. So again, its ability to go through deep conditions, its maneuverability, and then I'm going to add something in here as why this vehicle is actually ahead of the other one, even though this doesn't have always on all-wheel drive and diff lock, is that the KOLOB 74941, I've known about this for a while, but this vehicle is the most stable vehicle in the game. You would be very hard pressed to tip this over. This is a very forgiving vehicle to drive. If you are afraid of tipping a vehicle over while hauling a special mission trailer, just go get this truck. It will do it. It will save you. It is absolutely insanely stable. That is why this vehicle is going to be here. It is the most stable vehicle in the game, and it's also one of the most maneuverable, really heavy trucks that have big tires. So for that, they do the job of high saddle exceptionally well, and they still are doing that, even though there are lots of great options that we're going to talk about here coming up. And that's why this is going to stay here. All right, so this is where I was fighting my bias of not just throwing this vehicle down into D because I just despise it that much, but I'm going to put this vehicle in a place where I believe it probably should go, and that is the Zikz 612H Mastodon, which I absolutely hate, but I think because of merit purposes, it's going to go up here in the S. The Zikz 612H Mastodon weighs in at 32.5 US tons, 260,000 torque, gets it 9.0 power to weight, advanced special gearbox, always on all-wheel drive diff lock, 61-inch mud tires that are customs. Its fuel tank capacity is massive, its roof rack capacity is massive. It definitely has most add-ons that players love. Its advanced special gearbox is actually the best, has the best torque delivery from a standstill or low setting than any advanced special in the game, I believe. Now, the reason why this truck gets merit put up there is because, well, it's very stable. It is not the most stable vehicle in the game, however, it is exceptionally stable, and it has pretty much every add-on that players essentially want, which is why this vehicle is essentially the most or the best selling DLC to date. If you ever go watch people play on stream on any platform, most likely they're probably using a Mastodon running around and just crushing the whole map. And that's why it's pretty much here. I have a lot of disagreements with the implementation of this truck, but I think I'm going to be very short here and say, for merit purposes, I think this vehicle does deserve a spot here. So I'm just going to leave it there and then we'll move on. Okay, so next, let's talk about the number 2 heaviest vehicle in the game, the Kenworth 963. The Kenworth comes in at 36.1 US tons, 265,000 torque. Special gearboxes, also gets a high range. I probably still would use the advanced special here. Massive fuel tank, massive tires. All-wheel drive is switchable, diff lock is always on. It is the dream setup. There's no raised suspension. Stock Kenworth tires are what I personally use based upon some studies that I had on videos about tire slip. We talked about this a little bit on this video that you're watching right now, but if you'd like to learn more, basically it's a video showing that you downgrade grip coefficients and you increase pulling potential. You can use the 69-inch MSH tires if you would like. They are going to perform better in mud, but I like the Kenworth tires because of the slip factor, and also they look really good. Now, the Kenworth has a plethora of add-ons. The custom oil field bed is absolutely amazing looking. It is the best vehicle to overstack cargo, full stop. There is no other. It also has the highest sitting saddle in the game, I believe. So the reason the Kenworth is literally up here at the top right now is because its fuel capacity is super high, has roof rack supplies, has a good duration that you can actually have engine time, keeping this truck out in the field doing hard work. It can overstack like no other vehicle can. You can force direct power to its rear axles. Its saddle position and saddle height are exceptional. There is no other vehicle that has a higher sitting saddle, I believe. So with that being said, it does most things really well. The only thing I would knock on this truck is it just sometimes doesn't have enough power to pull exceptional or extreme loads up extreme slopes. And I think that is not necessarily a problem with the Kenworth. I think it's more a problem of we're expecting a vehicle to do too much. Now, when the Kenworth first came out, I did say, pull off all the add-ons and just give it more torque. Give it the 280,000 torque engine. And then let's just make it a pulling monster that is the highest sitting saddle in the game. But they gave it what they gave it at 265. I'm still happy with it. It is an S tier vehicle, and it's always going to be up at the top of the class. All right, so forgive me, I actually misplaced the Plad 450. This is actually supposed to go right here. These are behind it. That's just a misplace by me. So the Plad 450 definitely is better than the KOLOBs, so that's why I put that there, right behind this 612. So kind of at the top of the class. Now I want to talk about a Season 15 truck, and that is the Elephant. And I actually think the Elephant is right behind the Kenworth, and let's talk about why. So I'm going to be very brief here because I have made a full review on this truck. So if you'd like to see that, please go check it out. It has a lot more detail than what I'm about to tell you. But overall, the Elephant essentially weighs 32.3 US tons, 245,000 torque, advanced special gearbox or special gearbox, gets a multi-purpose which allows to have a faster high gear. This is really nice because you do have a switchable all-wheel drive and an always-on diff lock, giving you that dream setup to force direct power to its rear axles. And you might have to do this because the vehicle itself has kind of low power to weight. It's not as heavy as some of the heavier trucks like the KOLOBs, but still at 245,000 torque, weighing where it's at here, I definitely think you might have to at some point. Active suspension can raise, giving this thing some crazy clearances. Its collision mesh is really, really nice. Does have 67-inch tires. I tend to use its customs because they just look good, or you can use whatever you want. It's going to perform exceptionally well. The vehicle is a specialist, and this is what I liked what Sabre did in season 15. They brought a vehicle out that essentially was good at one thing, and it did it exceptionally well. The only thing what happened, or the only critique that I have on this truck when it first released, was there was too much weight in its aft part of its frame. What they did was they actually gave it a weight shift, so now it actually can steer better because more weight is down on its front axles to kind of bite in to give it steering control when it actually has load weight. I do want to mention this crane is exceptionally strong and can boom cargo over those boxes from the season 15 trailers. It has one of the highest sitting saddles in the game, kind of rivals, I don't think it's as high, but it almost is as high as the Kenworth 963, and the vehicle itself is exceptionally stable. Not to mention, it has a 101-gallon fuel tank with 64 gallons on its roof and 600 repairs. There's not many bad things you can say about the Elephant. This is how I think most heavy trucks should be. So when this came out, I was like, yes, finally, a vehicle that just essentially does a couple things very well, and that's it. Like, not every truck that has massive tires should do every single job, power creeping every other smaller class in the game. So the reason the Elephant is up here among the best in this class is because it has good maneuverability, good ground clearance, good power delivery. It has a very high sitting saddle, and it just does the job well, period. Full stop. It is a great truck to use for high saddle, and I think most players are going to have a wonderful time using it, and that's why it's going to sit here. Coming up to the end of this list, I'm going to throw the 605R back up in here to the top of this spot, and let's talk about this. I'm going to be very brief talking about the 605R here. It weighs 29.1 US tons, 260,000 torque, special gearboxes, no race suspension, stock ZHM tires, which are wider than they actually look, and they're pretty much the tire that you should use here. Concerning add-ons, when it first came out, players were pretty shocked about the add-ons that this truck was able to attach. Similar to kind of the P12, the P12 has a decent amount of add-ons for a heavy truck, and this joined that vehicle in having more add-ons than most heavy trucks do at the time. Well, after the year 2 pass and on to the year 3 pass, we started getting big heavy trucks that had crazy amounts of add-ons. So the relevance of the 605R kind of diminished, or I think the value kind of diminished because I think people value add-ons more than just sheer capability. I'm more of a person who values sheer capability over add-ons, especially for different roles of trucks. This one is essentially that. I believe it does exceptionally well with pulling weight. It was the best puller in the game. Better than the FEMM, better than the 612H. There wasn't a truck that I tested that beat the 605R in a pulling test until the Avenhorn came along. This truck is one of the most stable vehicles in the game. It's very maneuverable. It has exceptional pulling power, and it is a better off-roader pretty much than every other vehicle that is below it right now. And that is why it is up here, because even though it doesn't have the highest sitting saddle, even when it does snag, sometimes it'll just yank it through whatever it's snagged on because it's just that powerful. I think it goes to show how strong the 605R is, being able to stay at the higher ends of this tier list. No matter who you are, I think you do probably recognize the 605R is exceptionally strong. And it shows a lot that a vehicle that has come out in 2021 is still competing with vehicles coming out in 2025. But there is one vehicle that has come out in 2025 here that is a rival to the 605R. So let's talk about that one. Okay, so to close out this list, I'm going to throw the Avenhorn up here. I think it is the best vehicle in this whole class, and I have a review on it. If you'd like to see the small tidbits of information, that review is up on the channel. Please go check it out. There's so much information on why this vehicle is going to be at the top spot here, but I'm just going to breeze through this shortly here in the garage. All right, so the Avenhorn weighs in at 27.6 US tons, has 270,200 torque engine here, massive fuel capacity. Also gets kind of like a roof rack thing or a cab behind here that has supplies. Also, its bumpers have more fuel as well that you can use to call upon. Special gearboxes. It does have a highway gearbox, which really I would just use the advanced special, to be honest, because of the special properties of the high gear are absolutely insane. No race suspension. It doesn't even need a race suspension. Its collision mesh is absolutely fantastic. Gets the Avenhorn tires that I would probably not switch away from because they are pretty much as wide as the tractor tires. So like Futom tractor tires or K7M, I think it's like right in between or very similar to both of those in width in the rear. So you most likely want to use its custom tires. Now for add-ons, it has a ton of them, as you can see, and every single add-on that it has here, it can do well other than the Hydrolift saddle because, well, these trailers attached to this thing are just plain out stupid. I wouldn't even use that. It does have the Sleiter crane, which is the King Kong crane that you can use. And I also mentioned that universal compartment, giving it 80 gallons of fuel in the back. And then you have these fuel tanks up here whenever you attach a bumper. So keep that in mind whenever you want to take this thing out. In brevity, I'm going to just quickly say why this truck is the best vehicle in this class. It is essentially a Frankenstein vehicle. It has better power to weight than the 605R, so it can pull more weight than the 605R now. It has better ground clearance because the 605R wasn't given a ghost collision mesh similar to a lot of these trucks that are on this, and its tires are absolutely phenomenal. Not to mention, it has the most broken high gear in the whole game. This engine actually burns more fuel in low gear or any other gear than high. As soon as you switch to high, you gain 25% more torque, and the consumption on this gearbox, which is the advanced special, is stupidly low. So you have crazy amounts of power delivery, and you are just sipping fuel as a vehicle of this size, 27 tons. And that is why essentially the Avenhorn is going to be the best truck in the game. I think it does show that the 605R does still do a good job, but it just can't compete with the likes of a Frankenstein truck like this. And I don't know what vehicle is going to beat the Avenhorn. I really hope in the year 5 pass, the trend like this doesn't continue, because essentially we're going to see list like this. I think it's kind of sad looking at this list and wondering, why are all these vehicles up here in S? Like, there's more vehicles in S than any class. And I think just a testament that Sabre knows that strong trucks sell DLCs. And I really tried to rank these fair, or as fair as I could personally. And this is where I think they lie. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed the video and potentially learned a few things along the way as well. So until next time, y'all, God bless and stay upright.